if you then create an interface where all that modeling is assisted through computation because you've been already on the computer. Google, any website you're going to have as a massive computational system behind. But through the ease of the interface, it becomes very, very easy for us to operate that.
Welcome to AI for Architects, the podcast exploring how artificial intelligence is transforming the AEC industry and what it means for the future of your practice and our profession. I'm Haeusler, founder and CEO of MGS Global Group, a company dedicated to driving growth for architects. Each episode, we dive deep into AI's impact on architecture. You'll hear from leading architects, experts, and innovators who are shaping the future of our field with AI. Artificial intelligence is here and accelerating faster than we expect. Together, we'll build AI literacy to help you thrive in this evolving landscape. Think of AI as a way to stay ahead of the curve. Whether you're an early adopter or a fast follower, architects need to get moving. So what does this mean for the future of our profession? Join us as we explore the exciting opportunities and critical challenges presented by AI. Ready to explore? Let's dive into the episode. So welcome back to the AI for Architects podcast. Today I have a really exciting guest joining us. Someone who sits at the fascinating intersection of architecture, technology, and innovation in a way that very few people do. Someone I was connected to the ArchiCon waitlist very briefly. And when I saw his profile, I wanted to interview him with AI for Architects podcast. Professor Haeusler in Australian architecture and AI space and is involved in pretty much every facet. Hank is an Australian academic, entrepreneur who specializes in computational design and AI in architecture. He leads several research initiatives at the UNSW. He's a deputy director of the UNSW AI Institute. He's the co-founder of ArcManu and also heads research, foresight, and innovation at Giraffe Technology. Hank, welcome. Really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So I was looking at your profile and I'm like, what do I ask this guy? You do everything. So I had to study. And I'm like, I'll ask you all the things that you know about AI because this is what is really the major conversation. But before we get started, I just want to maybe start with an icebreaker or something personal. Like, what do you do for fun or hobbies?
Well, work is my hobby. I'm very, very lucky, and it sounds boring, I know. But I really like my work, and I enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm very privileged that I finally found a job that I like to do. I had many jobs before. I'm one of the few blue-collar academics, probably. I've been a trained electrician, so I worked in a factory for a long time. And then very late in life, or not late in life, in my 20s, studied architecture, and then had the urge to learn more, decided to do a PhD, and then became an academic. So I'm an academic now since 2009, started the PhD in 2003, and before that architecture. So it took me a while to find something I really, and what I like, of course, in academia, and that's the reason why it's my hobby, it's never the same. You just can change topics. So in the context of AI, around 2014-15, I started looking into AI because I found it fascinating and made it my hobby in my work now, which is something that you probably can do not in many jobs, but in academia, you can do that if you find a new niche or new kind of role, a gap in knowledge, and you would then go and say, well, this is what I focus on. Then you've got the flexibility to do so and then go deeper into the topic. And if you somehow succeed in doing that by publishing or by getting funding, then you can go even deeper and wider into the topic. And that's why I am at the moment with the AI research.
So you've been doing AI research since 2014.
Yeah, I was the founding director of an undergrad degree in computational design. So it's the world's first undergrad degree in computational design. And computational design bridges architecture and design with engineering and science through a profound understanding of computation and computing. And at UNSW in Sydney here, the university, well, as a director, I had the flexibility to choose what the graduation project would be like. And I gave that responsibility to firms and said, well, if you come with a problem to me, then we, through our academic frameworks, through the students, could investigate that problem. And around 2014-15, first conversation of industry partners that are very heavily in computational design started discussion on AI machine learning. And at the same time, I was involved very, very early with Giraffe at the time on a project on data and data analytics.
Before we continue, can you explain what computational design is for the people? Yes.
So computational design is designing architecture through computer programming, not through drawings. And if you think about architecture or industrial design or urban design, it's very simple. It's geometry. On the highest level, anything that you see in your room can be described as a geometry. It's a wall, it's a column, and the like. If it's geometry, it's math. And if it's math, you can explain it to a computer. And then suddenly you're going into a domain where you describe what you want to have as a building through a big equation, where the other side of the equation is not another number, but a building. But of course, if you change one number of the equation, or you associate one number as a variable with a certain function, for example, cost or civil engineering or sustainability, then these things can change and be adapted. So your design changes as well. And I think this is a very interesting way of looking to architecture, in particular in the performance of architecture. When you say we want to design a building that is very sustainable or that's very circular or the like, then you have these means through computation to do that. And because you start thinking into architecture through mathematics and through computers, the jump to AI is then easier because AI, machine learning, again, is statistics, mathematics equation. So in these projects and with the students and the industry partners, the question then came up on, can you use the main program that we use in computational design, Grasshopper? So Grasshopper is a programming language, and open the black box that AI is through following all the steps that a neural network would do through Grasshopper. So there's a paper out there, when you look at that we've published, maybe 2015-16, on that work on a student kind of project. And because I was supervising the student and engaged, I said, before I tell nonsense, I better look up books and familiarize myself what AI and machine learning is. And again, as mentioned earlier, through a research project, I got in contact with one of my colleagues that I still work here from computer science, Mike Bain. And on the taxi drives back home from the client meeting to the university, I asked him questions after questions about what machine learning really is. And he asked me question after question what architecture really is. And through these conversations, I think he understood better architecture, I hope. I definitely understood better AI and machine learning, and then really got fascinated about the potentials of AI through these conversations.
And so you mentioned you started working with Giraffe. I saw on LinkedIn that it's been 7 years already. So can you explain what it is that Giraffe does? I know you do a little digital twins and studies on the environment, right? It's also like computational design. Can you explain a little bit of your role and what Giraffe does?
So I'm one of the co-founders of Giraffe, and what I do in Giraffe is now very on the side. I'm still the head of research, foresight, innovation, but the company, with the help of George and Lucy and others, really spun forward in really great domains. But when we started the research and the company, we acknowledged one main fact. Computational design is awesome, but it has one big problem. You need to understand computer programming. And this is something that is a huge barrier for a lot of people to get into, and a lot of architects don't really want to go into computer programming. But at the same time, we also found and seen that through file format called JSON, a JavaScript object notation, you have a GeoJSON where you've been able to define geometry on the web browser. So again, around that kind of time, we had students that look into, in their graduation project as a bachelor students, can you represent geometry on the web browser? Which is the main thing. If you can represent geometry in the web browser, you could start modeling on the browser. And
If you're running a growing architecture firm, you're probably not short on projects, you're short on people. Talent shortage is real. Finding and retaining skilled professionals takes time. Meanwhile, deadlines keep getting closer. And when you're balancing growth with quality, it gets harder to maintain your project standards as the work piles up. We're here to bridge the gap. We provide qualified architecture staff on demand so you can scale your delivery without compromising quality. That's what MGS Global Group does. Whether you're overwhelmed with construction documentation, need BIM support, or your internal systems just aren't built for this level of growth, our team plugs in seamlessly. Think of us as an extension of your in-house team without the long hiring process. And because we work across time zones, your projects keep moving even after your office closes for the day. If your timelines are starting to feel stretched and your team's at capacity, visit mgsglobalgroup.com. We can get started in 24 hours. We're here to help you scale smarter and deliver faster with quality, consistency, and peace of mind.
If you then create an interface where all that modeling is assisted through computation because you've been already on the computer. Google, any website you're going to have as a massive computational system behind. But through the ease of the interface, it becomes very, very easy for us to operate that. You can do a Google search, but you have no idea how the Google search really works. All the computation is somewhere behind there. So the same kind of idea would then apply for Giraffe, that you could model, you could access data, and you can design in a data-rich environment with the assistance of computation. So it's a modeling tool with an Excel spreadsheet combined.
Yeah, I actually looked at Giraffe because I also review AI tools. It looks like Snaptrude in a way that it's Snaptrude, and there's another one that also does environmental analysis and studies, as well as digital twins. So it's a combination of all of that, correct? It seems very user friendly. Maybe it has evolved now that it's more open to architects and firm owners. Am I correct?
It's actually, so when we started Giraffe, a lot of other companies started at the same time with a very similar kind of idea and with a very similar kind of background. There were a lot of these founders from these companies that you just mentioned were trained architects that understood computation, that were frustrated with the work architects do and execute when they said that there should be a better way. We can do it differently. And we can bring our knowledge into architecture and our knowledge in computation into a mixture to develop then something that is more user-friendly, which is then first an idea. To then translate later the idea into a business model is the hard part. But I think more and more people understand that it's actually relatively easy to bring an idea into computation. So we didn't really have much money at the beginning of Giraffe. It was just everybody putting a couple of $1,000s on the table and say, let's try that. Because the barrier to invent and to compute is so low now that you don't really need a big company. Everyone could do it by themselves. And this has then resulted that there's not only like a handful of these companies around, but there are probably 1,500 companies around. There's a platform around called ADDD.io from Alistair Lewis, who is, again, a platform similar like to the Apple Store or the Play Store in Google, where all the apps are sorted. So instead of sorting apps, you've got a platform where all the tools that could be used in architecture are sorted. That brings in an interesting conversation into how you work in architecture. Do you depend on the main incumbent software companies, or you spread slowly out and say, I'm going to use very specific tools for my job? And then the creation of these different kind of tools in your workflow becomes another challenge, and it becomes an AI challenge. Can you help, or can you work where an AI understands what you want to do and therefore assists you with the right tool? Could an AI understand what you're doing and then just taking certain automations and move them forward and then hand over to you again as a human? So I think the advancements of individual companies, of individual tools, have really raised the question what the work of architecture in the future would be.
That's interesting. Now that I know you're like an early adapter. Like a lot of people just started using AI in 2023 when ChatGPT just exploded, right? I know you're doing so many things. Like, how has academia, practice, and research helped you put the pieces together over time? And can we talk a little bit about Arc Manu?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I was always interested in challenges that the architecture firms have. At the beginning, as I said, out of lack of creativity in developing grad projects for my students. I talked to industry, but as more as I talk, I understood there's certain elements within the firms that could be solved through computation or through computational thinking. And over the years, of course, these kind of challenges and these problems became bigger and bigger. But also the experience here in Sydney from the firms through hiring then the computational science students in their practice, the knowledge got higher and higher. So we then went in 2017 into the first round where we applied for major funding to say that there seemed to be a challenge that architecture firms are falling behind for many, many years in their digital uptake, in their productivity, in their efficiency. And if you look into other industries like manufacturing and the like, and you see how they have progressed in their productivity, it is mainly due to better use of digital tools. Because you will still have architecture firms around that hopefully no longer do hand drawing in 2D, but AutoCAD drawing in 2D. Whereas academia or research have moved into complete different dimensions now. So there's a huge kind of gap. And in order to address that gap, we then seek government funding through a grant application. We were 2 times unsuccessful, but a 3rd time lucky. And the 3rd time lucky was then that we've got ArchMenu, the ARC Center, the Australian Research Council Center for Next-Gen Architecture Manufacturing, short ArchMenu. So what did we do and what did we focus in this center? Well, in a nutshell, architecture firms, engineering firms, design firms need to operate in a circular environment, in a circular economy, and in a digital economy as well.
Can you explain what a circular economy is and a digital economy?
Yeah. So one of the 6 elements that we want to focus in the research is the architecture, engineering, and construction sector is responsible for most of waste production, is responsible for most of the carbon emission, and responsible for most of the material consumption. We also have been not very good in delivering projects on budget, on time, and for the benefit of the community. So quite often there's a balance between you want to be greener, but it costs money. But if you look into the climate crisis that we have and the role the SC sector plays in it, there's simply not enough amount of material around to continue building the way we build. There's not enough sand for concrete, there's not enough timber, there's nothing really is around enough. So increasingly we have to go from a linear economy where we're going to go to a hardware store and buying virtual materials for our buildings to a circular economy, where if we acknowledge the fact that most materials have been consumed already by the AC sector, so most materials are actually in buildings. So I would see a future, and I think we have to go into that future, where you use materials that are currently in existing buildings and they have ceased their life because they've been 60, 70 years old, and you have to readapt them again. So they need to become a material bank in order to be used for future projects.
So is it like adaptive reuse, like you would get some materials from?
Exactly. Yeah. But in order to do adaptive reuse, you cannot go into a building and just count all the bricks by hand or calculate all the screws or all the elements. You need an intelligence that is able to do these things, which is then a digital intelligence. So when we focus on AI, robotics, machine learning, big data, Moore's law of computing, all these things in our center, we do so because we think we can solve the climate crisis through digital tools.
So the digital tools that you're thinking about, is that part of Giraffe, or what kind of digital tools can help with circularity?
All tools. So what I explain to my students always is the role between architecture and technology. And around the late 19th century, early 20th century, new general purpose technologies came up. So let's pick 2 of them that are very, very commonly known: electricity and the combustion engine. So what is the role and what is the impact that electricity and the combustion engine has to architecture? Well, it's very, very simple. Without a combustion engine, no car. Without a car, no urban sprawl. Our cities would look completely different. Without electricity, no elevator. Without no elevator, no high rises. Again, architecture would look completely different. So there's a very kind of simple example to visualize how general purpose technologies, or technologies that just influence not just a niche, but the society has an impact onto architecture. And the second age machine technologies are robotics, AI, machine learning, data generated through social media, sensor, Internet of Things, Moore's law of computing, that computing power increases every 18 months. So while these techniques might not change as radically the way architecture look, like urban sprawl or high rises, they will have a very profound way of how we work and how we conceive architecture and build architecture, how we as an individual, as an architect in a firm, need to work in the future, how a business owner needs to think about running their firm in the age of AI and digital tools. And this is a parallel challenge to the challenge of circularity, of designing for a circular economy. So my poor friends in architecture, in the architecture firm, sit now there with two massive problems where even bigger firms like massive corporations struggle with this change. So what chance would have a fragmented SME-oriented sector, like our sector, the architecture sector, have in solving these systemic risks? You need systemic innovations to solve those systemic risks. And this is where Archmenu and the universities come in. Universities are systemic innovators. This is all we do. We invent, we research. So I think it is very important to bring the innovation potential of the universities with the challenges and the risks that the SMEs, the architecture firms face together, so we become their R&D department.
So, how do you approach architects who are sometimes or they just work head down, and some architects even forget to build because they just want to finish their project? So, like a lot of architects are the smaller firms in general, it's like feast or famine. There's a pipeline of work, and sometimes there's no work. How do you introduce them to your technology and to what you're learning when they can barely pay some bills or find new clients? So that is the struggle between academia and real working architecture firms, especially the mid-sized firms. How do you bridge that gap?
You point a very big challenge and a criticism for academia. Over the years, and I was guilty of that as well, and still probably guilty, most of my findings are published through academic journals, conferences, where if you're going to go to these conferences, you don't see a single architect, you see only academics. So I'm talking what I know to other people that are in the field. Or journals. When was the last time you read a journal article or a conference papers, the architects in the audience? Not very often.
Exactly. And you've published 150, over 150.
Exactly. Okay. So good luck reading them all. But what we do in Archmenu, and one of the things as a KPI, as a mandate we wrote into, is that we develop 156 CPD courses, continuous professional development courses. We know that architects in Australia, and it's very similar to other nations as well, in order to keep your registration, you have to do a lifelong learning mandate where you have to do in Australia 10 formal and 10 informal CPD courses per year.
So the CPDs, yeah.
Exactly. So we're developing CPD courses up to this point. I think we've got 50 completed, where myself talk about AI. So I've got several kind of CPD courses to some of our peak body partners like registration boards or institutes and the like, about the knowledge I've got on AI and how I see AI and how AI changes, up to PhD research topics, up to other academics talking about what they know. If an academic comes by our way and we meet them and we think, hey, you really have something interesting to say, we invite them to our Archmenu Talk series and they talk about that. So we hope through that we can dangle small bite-sized pieces of knowledge to architects that they have in their very, very busy life, have something, have to do it anyway. So I can see 10 times X, or I can see 10 times talks about digital tools, about digital transformation, about business, about circularity, to change them slowly. And over the next year or two, we want to extend that from knowledge-based courses to skill-based courses. That again, as a university, we are an education provider, we can do training as well. Can we train on things that we know and we communicate to 20-year-old, to 40, 50-year-old? Grasshopper, for example, the computation design language, programming language that I talked before, it's actually irrelevant how old you are. If you don't really know it, you have to start with 0. It's the same
Exactly.
if you would learn German or Japanese. Doesn't
Are you
matter what.
German, Hank?
I'm German, yeah. So it
Ich
doesn't.
spreche ein bisschen Deutsch.
So you know that didn't really matter how old you are. You have to start
Yeah.
with very, very simple things. And of course, the same thing goes for understanding computation, understanding how to operate in a digital environment. It's not that I was born in a different world where digital always exists in knowledge. You had to learn that. So I started a little bit earlier, but I think it's never too late to engage with that. And therefore, I'm quite glad that I've got a chance for the podcast to talk to different forums, to an audience and say, yeah, it's confusing and it's hard at the beginning, but I think it is important and relevant at this moment to engage with what AI can and can't do, because it influences any aspects of your life, not your professional life as well, but also your private life. So if you stay away of that, then you don't really participate in critical conversations as society has at the moment, and you've been left in the dark. So for all the architects, just use the time, invest into it. And if it's the machine learning for dummies or all those kind of books that are around there, they might not give you a complete understanding at the beginning, but you start with something.
Yeah. So because you're in academia, right? Do you think there's a gap between, or is it easier for the students that you teach to get jobs now? Because there's a little bit of a disconnect. Like the firms that are right now are probably not that AI literate. What are you teaching your students so that they can have a balance between AI education and what's out there in practical architecture firms? Is there a struggle between for some of your students?
No, I think so. Digital disrupts. I think we can agree on that. And you could either be the
Yes.
disruptor or you could be the one who's been disrupted. And in a review of our course through the university a few years ago, where the academic board interviewed our students on that kind of question, they said, no, we're the disruptor. We don't fear disruption. We disrupt. And I think this is absolutely right. We train them in a computational understanding that they would understand what it would mean to operate and to deliver projects through a digital lens. And because we've got now, I don't know, I've never counted them, but I think 500 students over the years, mainly in Sydney. I think Sydney is in a very unique situation where you have nearly all major firms have a computational design team. And now even like mid-size for 30 to 40 people have 1 or 2 computational designers that have just been around. And I think that's quite different to other cities where you don't really have that. So if you go within Australia, if you would go to other capital cities, because of the lack of computation, you don't really have these kind of people around. So I think we trained our students very, very well for the future, but the future actually is changing dramatically through AI, and therefore education needs to change quite quickly as well. So let's think about what people do in an architecture office. And on a nutshell, there are 2 main jobs. There are skill-based jobs and there are knowledge-based jobs. And anyone who's been an architect knows that you're going to come into the firm in the beginning, you draw, you model something, and you're going to do that for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And slowly you're going to build up more knowledge. So you're going to go to a knowledge level when you become a project architecture director and so on. What can AI replace? AI can replace skill-based jobs. So you're modeling, you're drawing. There's an increasing amount of tools around that could do your site analysis, that could do your documentation, that could do all the things that the majority of graduates would do. So I think that there is a significant risk that through AI in architecture, jobs will disappear or will change. And we are very active at the moment through the center as well to discuss and to understand what that shift in the education would mean. And the education doesn't really mean only for the students. It also means for people that working as modelers, as architects in the firm. Minute taking, any kind of text-based things, gone. So you don't have to do that. And if it's gone, then, well, you don't need that person or the time for that person to do that. Then modeling is gone, then rendering is gone, then, the list gets longer and longer. So therefore, training And retraining is important not only for the students and to think, how do we educate the students that start, it's the beginning of the year in Northern Hemisphere, so a lot of students start now their degree. What do you do? How are we going to train you when you do a 5-year study for architecture and then you work for 40 years? What future do we have in 45 years? I don't know, honestly.
Can you tell us? Can you predict?
Here's the crystal ball. Now I can't predict, but I'm fairly certain it will be different than 45 years ago. I think it's a very, this is the reason why it's important to engage with AI, because if you understand what is possible and what is not possible, you can shape your own future, your own kind of direction. You can take part of that discussion versus if you stand on the outside, it will just run over you.
That's true. So you mentioned that a lot of our Australian firms are already doing computational design. What type of software are they using? Do you know the type of software that these companies are using? And I know computational design is normally for bigger projects, right? Do residential architects use that now too?
Well, you could use computational design on any scale. The software
Okay.
packages they use, if Grasshopper, Python, then
Yeah.
you can do a lot of things. Increasingly, and it's interesting with AI, you don't need to know much Python anymore. You could go into vibe coding. So vibe coding is a way through natural language to explain a large language model like Claude and the like. What do you want?
Like vibe coding, right?
Yeah,
Vibe
exactly, vibe
coding.
coding. What do you want to do? Which of course then disrupts even more than it disrupts our students as well. We've got students now who can do certain things in 3 to 5 minutes, where before they need several weeks of doing that, but just explaining what you want to have. And that will only increase. Any large language model will get better and better. So with
Yeah.
Claude Cowork, for example, you can do that. But in general, if you understand...
Claude is exploding right now, Hank.
It is, yeah. But if you understand first computational thinking, that you start thinking differently, you systematically think about what do you want to achieve, what kind of parameters, what kind of performance you want to put into your project, and then you've been able to compute that through Grasshopper, Python, or C languages if you want to do more, or Java if it's web-based, then you can do a lot of things. So it's not really software packages, it's software or programming languages that most of our students use. And then you also got the ability to link different things together. For example, Rhino with Revit, so Rhino inside Revit with Grasshopper. And the majority of the firms we work with this, well, you have Revit, you've got Rhino, and you use Grasshopper Python to link them better together, to optimize certain things. And they're quite often not really the provocative, sexy things that you're going to see. They're mundane things like you have a major building with hundreds of doors and you have to do a door scheduling. If you do it by hand, then you spend the weekend in the office again as an architect. If you do it
I did that before.
If you do it with a computer, then you can do it better. So I think it's really these things, and that's what I focus on, to take away or remove the day-to-day grind of things that you don't want to do, to open up the opportunity to more focus on what is the quality, what is the experience that you would have as a human in architecture, to spend more time in that. The reality is we spend more time on scheduling and other things than actually on designing well.
So, like architecture is the built environment, and only humans can experience the built environment, and only humans have the 5 senses. So even though it's scary that AI could potentially replace some of our jobs, but human beings are the only people who can experience. And architecture is about all experience. So that is what's giving me hope for the future of our profession, because we're curating spaces for people to connect and community and to feel and to hear and to see, right? So that's how I think about AI and our role as human beings. And AI slap, for instance, Hank, like a lot of younger people just produce AI slap. But when you have 20 to 30 years of architecture experience, you can see right away if it's sloppy or not, right? Like when you have all that experience. But I'm curious, when you submitted your learning objectives, I was drawn by what you said about understanding the difference between AI for architecture, AI for architects, and AI for the architecture business. Can you talk about that a little bit?
AI is a one-trick pony. So it only can do one thing. The AI that you use in your large language model to generate a text is not the same AI that you might have for your self-driving car. They're completely different things. So only humans at this point, and potentially for a very, very long time and potentially forever to be discussed, are in a position that I could write now a text and I could leave this room here and drive a car and then do other things. For a robot or for an AI, this is very, very difficult to do because it's only one particular task, and you train for this particular task with data and through programming and through an algorithm that the computer could do that. So if you talk about AI for all in architecture, it's not possible. So the first step, you need to separate between architects, architecture business, and architecture, the thing we're going to build. And if you have that separation, then you can go deeper and down and understand, well, what an AI could do and what is the relationship between one and the other through the AI. So, for example, I'm by far more interested not so much what AI can do for architecture, the buildings around. I'm more interested in what it's doing for business. So what business decisions do you need to make as a business owner towards AI, of an AI strategy, a governance plan, and the like? But then also, you need to tell people in your firm how they have to work with AI. So we are very good in working with other consultants, engineers, whatever, you name it. But they've got one thing in common, they've always been humans. So we will have now another coworker amongst us who is an AI, a particular tool that you could use that is very good. It's by far better that you ever can be. You can't compete against it. It's faster, it's accurate if it's correctly trained. But where do you bring that tool into your day-to-day process? And this is a huge challenge because the older generations amongst us remember Clippy from Microsoft that tried to help you in your work, but always failed. So to understand what can AI do, what can I do as a human, what should I train myself on and be better, which is the area that AI can't really do, and how could I work together is probably more what I'm focused and interested in our research than using DALL-E or Midjourney to create an interesting image. For that, you only have to struck a sentence together. You don't have to be very creative. I don't think this is really, it was exciting for a while, but it wears off. I think there are bigger problems to look into now than just image generation.
What keeps you up at night, Hank, when it comes to AI and work?
I think it's a bit uncertainty what AI really could do. But then an uncertainty is part of an academic work. You don't really know what the result would be. If you know the result, you wouldn't really research that. So it's not really keeping me up at work. I think it's more, what do we use AI for? What's the ethical application for AI? In particular, in our role, can we direct the effort onto AI on the climate crisis? Because the first machine age with the general purpose technologies of combustion engine and electricity, for example, gave us the ability to increase our muscle powers by 1,000-fold. We could lift up things and move things we've never been before. So maybe the second machine age with AI could then help us in our brain capacity and understanding things. And what I mean with that is, when I did a first project about AI in a meeting room, there was a map of Sydney, just showing the size of Sydney. And the research project at the time was an extension and working on Sydney as a city in the western part. So Sydney is a harbour city, so the one side is towards the ocean, so you can't extend there. The other one is towards the land. You can extend the city there. And we talked about that area, which was probably 30, 40 times of the area that I know from Sydney, that I normally commute around and feel familiar with. And I always thought it is impossible for a human to understand the actions and the consequences of this huge area. It's just too much. We don't really have the capacity to deal with large numbers. We don't have the capacity as a human to understand huge, complex areas, but an AI could do. So my hope is that an AI could help us with the complexities that we have in climate change of lots of conflicting information and inputs, that we can work together with an AI and say, well, make sense of this. give me a suggestion, and I, as a human, then can say, from my human level, I think this is a good way or not. The same way we work together with a crane and say, well, I need to lift something up here. Can you help me with that?
Do you have kids, Hank? No.
Yeah.
How old are they?
One boy, 10 years old. Hello, Henry.
Okay, because I have kids too, and one is 19 and one is 16. So as a mom, my daughter, who's 19, she said she was concerned about her future. Apparently, people can't find jobs anymore because of AI, and it's very confusing for kids nowadays. So, what do you suggest? I know this is not architecture related, but this is AI and the world, the future of our kids. So, what do you tell your kids to do right now? Like my son is, do I even need to go to school? To college, he will because he wants the experience. But what are your thoughts about the future entering, the younger generation entering this whole age of AI? What do you tell your son?
So, well, I tell him that what your work would be will change. When you been their age and you would have told your parents that you run podcasts and this is your profession, your parents probably would choke in their head and say, what are you doing? Learn something proper. Or if you would have told your parents they're going to design web pages or become an app developer, or all these jobs didn't exist 20 years ago, or maybe a bit longer, let's say 30 years ago. But definitely in the 1990s, podcast did not been a thing. Content generator for YouTube did not be a thing. So there's a lot of kind of new jobs have started yet. And I think with AI, and it's always with technology, if we've been born in the 1880s, and our father would have said to us, become a hoofsmith. There's horses will always be around. We always had horses. Also not a good advice because we know there's not much hoofsmiths around anymore, or blacksmiths. So I think jobs always change, work always change. The only kind of difference is the speed things will change. You could start a career as a blacksmith in 1880 and probably could see the end of your career as a blacksmith in the 1930s, around that. I think what probably kids need to understand is just to be agile and be adaptive, understanding that they probably will have not just one job, but have many jobs. That this is also nothing really new. I had a job, I was an electrician, then an architect, now an academic. Who knows what I'm going to do in a few years' times. But it's hard to change constantly, to reinvent yourself as well. But maybe the younger generation find it easier because it's more in a digital world that things change quite quickly. They adopt to new tools, Facebook in, Facebook out, Instagram in, Instagram out, TikTok in, TikTok out. They've been able to be that more agile. It is interesting. I sometimes would love to transport myself into the future and see the future, what it would be like. I hope I would like it, but I was interested in history in the past. So it would be interesting to see what it will be in 2160.
I know. I was thinking the same thing too, right? Everything is changing so fast within a year. So I can imagine what's going to happen in 2060.
Yeah. And I think this is an important thing that I think, and I can come back to it over and over again, that everyone should be engaged and inform themselves about what AI is and what digital tools can and cannot do and what it would mean to live in a digital world. Because if you're concerned about it or you want to know what's going on, if you've been informed, then you quite often can separate fact from fiction. A lot of people talk about humanoid robots. You see a lot of humanoid robots that dance around and do stuff. But when I speak to my colleagues in the AI Institute who have been robotics engineers for all their life and it make it their profession to understand what's possible and not possible, a lot of these things are just stage shows. They're not really what computers really can do, what robots can do. Yes, they can dance, but it's just they've been programmed for only this dance or for this kind of kickbox events or whatever it is. If you put them out in the wild, it would be by far harder. So by just understanding what is possible and what's not possible by being an informed human being, you suddenly probably have less fears, or you've got other fears, or you've got a certainty what could be done and could not be done, versus following the last YouTube video of whatever certain things.
That's true. So another question is, what do you think is the future of architecture firms who don't adapt AI? Because there are a lot. still.
I think they will start to disappear. I think if you look into the history of companies that did not understand that change is happening. So, for example, we all know Kodak as a film company. They disappeared not so much because they didn't really see the future coming of digital photography. What they didn't really anticipate is that people don't want to print out their photos anymore. They've got a screen in their pocket where they can look all their photos constantly. So I don't think that architects, the biggest disruptor and the biggest threat for architects is not architecture firms and their competition, it's tech firms.
Mm.
When you've been a company like Giraffe or Snapshot or others, that you more and more understand the domain of architecture and you can do certain things. At some stage, you could go from one element to architecture jobs, a DA approval, or a feasibility study or documentation. You could span in all directions down the workflow. And you could do more and more because you're an AI first or digital first company. So I think as much as Kodak was not interrupted and brought onto its knees by the fact that of digital photography and the way that film business changed to a chip in the camera, it's just other, like an Apple, a Google, and so a Samsung that produce these phones where you can see these images and that will disrupt it. So what do you then do as an architecture firm? I think you should start very actively thinking and very hard and long about your future. Not the future of architecture, please. I don't care if the buildings are sustainable or not sustainable, or they're using biomaterials or not biomaterials. Think about your business. What is your strength of your business? What is the weakness of the business? What works for your business? Develop a business plan for you. And unfortunately, at least in my education, there was not much business training in architecture.
Yes.
And I think this is another big problem, that architects are not trained to run a business. Start a business very naively because your uncle or your aunt wanted a house extension, then you bring your mate in there and more mates and you're getting more successful. And suddenly you've got 40 people and you say, you're a nice guy, you do HR, you're good with numbers, you do finance. If you talk to architecture firms on a mid-level up to a bigger level, how many of the executive members have an MBA or start in business? Most often the answer is 0. And I think they run a firm. If you run a firm with 3 people, you're a business owner. But you think you can do that and you don't really think about business. So business strategy, think about your strategy, what you want to be. Lay out a plan that you want to do for your firm, and then think about how you can execute that.
So do you have any CPDs for that that you can share?
Not a CPD yet, but we're doing at the moment a future scenario analysis with the colleagues from the business school. So in Arch Menu in our center, we also got colleagues from the business school that couldn't care less about architecture. Sorry, they care about architecture, but it's not their business field. So they say the architecture, engineering, construction sector, or the architecture, design, engineering industry is what we're going to look into. We looked before into pharmaceutical, or we looked into whatever. We focus on that and we just bring the knowledge on our business insights research on change management, organizational change, economics, foresight, strategy, IT system and management, all that into it as well, because we've done it for many other sectors before. So we can do it for architecture as well. And the architects could benefit from these insights. So what we hope is that through these conversations, these research packages, and the increased training through the CBD courses, give companies a little bit insight what business thinking is.
Yeah. I have another podcast, Hank. It's called Architect My Business. It is really helping architects run better and more profitable businesses. And I interview service providers like finance people, marketing people, those people who help architects and very successful firm owners, right? And so I think that it's really important for architects to learn how to run a business because we are running a business, not a hobby, right? A lot of creatives just don't know how to do that. So I think resources on your end, if you have any resources you want to share with me, I can post it on my website and LinkedIn because everybody right now needs to learn how to run a business, especially with this geopolitical things going on, as well as the AI. We need to move fast.
Yep. Yep. Maybe invite Lisa, our postdoc, to talk about the research we've been doing, which is
Oh, that would be amazing.
kind of work. What work do you hand over to an AI and what not? What is the future business model of architecture? We've got 7, 8 topics that we investigate either through the postdocs, masters, or PhD students on business and architecture.
That would be amazing. I can interview her on the other podcast, the Architect by Business podcast.
Absolutely, yeah. Because she comes from a business background. So again, she's understanding now architecture, she understands the profession, and she sees that really through her business lens. You might have a desire later to employ certain architects, like a computational designer. But if your office is in a location where there's no computational designers around and nobody wants to come, then good luck in employing somebody. So it's strategy is one thing, but the conditions around the strategy is another thing. Accreditation, competency standards in architecture around the world will hinder or foster an engagement with AI. And we're looking really holistically into these things.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? When you signed up to be a waitlist, we asked our the waitlist people, what are the biggest concerns architects are facing right now? The first one is business development, marketing. The second, I think, is sales. And the third is AI. That's why when we were curating all of our content I really thought the first issue or problem that architects are facing is AI adoption. But no, it's actually business development and marketing. Interesting. That's why we had to tailor our content to like more balanced, not just AI heavy, but really the business side of architecture, how to do marketing, business development, finance, operations.
No, exactly.
So, yeah.
The main reason I'm an academic is because I worked in an architecture firm before I started my PhD for a year. That stayed with me, the experience, for a very long, long time. I had to work a minimum of 100 hours per week. And it was mainly because...
What?
Yeah. So it was really a lot of kind of work to be done there. And I look back again, it's just really because the company was not run professionally through a business lens. I was working before a company in the US before that, where you could go back home at a normal hour, and if you work extra, there was extra paid hours. But the company there was really run as a business. They understood it as a business, and certain elements that make a business run were in place. And not like an artist-like studio where things are not really working and you, in the middle of the night, look for paper to print and there's no paper because people forgot to order paper or stuff like that. This is a big... I understand that the business of architecture is important because the success of your firm really depends how well you run your business. Not so much
That's
your
true.
good idea.
I have a few more questions before you wrap up.
Sure.
Very practical. What are the AI tools every architecture practice should be looking at right now?
There are 12 million different answers for that. And I just put a number out of my head.
I know, right?
As I said before, AI is a one-trick pony. It only can do one job well. If you would think how many things you're going to do during a day that could be described as one discrete task, then probably you get to the 12 million different kind of tools. There's not one thing around. So I think that people always come and say, what tool should I use? The first tool I would use is knowledge and inform yourself about what AI can do. The second thing is then potentially go learn a little bit computational thinking and programming. Python, I would recommend to start with Python, and then go deeper into vibe coding that you can do your own tools. Then you can find a particular challenge that you see. Then you can, whatever, say, okay, I would be able now to compute that kind of challenge through my experience with vibe coding, and I can make my own little tool. It might not be AI, because 99% of all the things that you're going to see has not AI inside. It's just simple computational stuff.
So I've heard vibe coding a lot, and I just have a question, right? For an architect who wants to start vibe coding, do they go to Claude and just say, this is my problem, can you help me create a solution for this? And then the Claude can create like code for that and make you an app? Can you explain that a little?
Yes, no. So if I would ask you now to get up in your room and go to the fridge and get a bottle of water out of your fridge, you would be able to do that, right?
Yes.
If I would tell that to a robot needs to do a lot of things, before they can
Yeah.
do that. And therefore, AI needs to do a lot of things. So you need to understand who I am, what is a fridge, what is a bottle of water, how can I open the door, how can I walk, lots of different kind of tasks in there. So if you would think about, I want to do an AI, and you say, do me an AI that does all my documentation for me, that vibe coding or whatever would not ever work that. But if you say, create me something that as soon as if I do X, Y will happen, and you break things down to a smaller thing, then fairly certain vibe coding could do it. Our students use a lot of vibe coding for digital tools, for an urban analysis, where you say, in the context of Sydney, by using a map, we want to access a database that visualizes or takes the information of bus real-time information onto this map, visualize buses that are on time green, others red. Then you give more specific and precise information. And this is the thing you really need to understand for AI, that you have to be precise in your demand, not vague.
Hank, thanks so much for explaining all the things and really trying to make it more digestible for me and for my audience. You really took the time to explain in a very basic way, like to help us understand. Because I know you come from academia and you're a PhD, and all the questions that I were asked were like, "Okay, can you explain that a little more?" So I really appreciate your time and being on the podcast. But I have one more question before we end. What are your parting thoughts in general for the industry? If there's one thing that you can share or impart to all the architects who are just trying to build better practices, how to future proof their firms right now in 2026 and beyond.
Accept that lifelong learning is a necessity now, that you cannot depend on the things you've learned in your student time as the only truth or the only thing that you need to know in order to operate your job. You need to update yourself more and more. And I think you should, as a staff member, actively seek a conversation with your employee or employer on carving out time for training. And if you've been a company owner, you should understand that training of your staff and giving your staff time to be trained is important as well. Because without training, without upgrade, your firm will struggle, and potentially your employee will move to other firms where there's better training opportunities.
Thanks so much, Hank. That was so powerful, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you for being on your show. It was really interesting to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us in another episode of AI for Architects. I hope today's episode sparked your curiosity about AI's impact and opportunities in architecture. Subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss our upcoming episodes, and sign up for our newsletter for exclusive content and AI tool reviews at aiforarchitects.ai/subscribe. This podcast is brought to you by MGS Global Group, driving growth for architects everywhere.